I'm Paul Edwards. I'm a self-published horror author, and first and foremost, a monster kid. Today I'm reading Monsters of the Movies magazine, issue number 8, from 1975. I thought some of you might enjoy flipping through this vintage magazine with me. Together, let's see what kinds of monster kid goodness is in here. This cover of Monsters of the Movies has a great artist depiction of Barnabas Collins from the horror soap opera Dark Shadows and Peter Cushing in character as Professor Van Helsing from the Hammer Studios Dracula movies. They didn't actually meet on screen. This is just an artist's envisioning the two of them together. But look at that. They did a great job both on Jonathan Frid and on Peter Cushing. Yep. All right, so in this issue, which is issue number 8 of Monsters of the Movies, we're going to get a piece on not only Barnabas Collins and on Peter Cushing, but on Amicus, some might say the poor man's Hammer Studios. But is that really what it is? Let's find out. And this is the greatest fright film stars of all time for only $1. The Man of 1,000 Phases. Because Lon Chaney Sr., the old-time horror star, was the Man of 1,000 Faces. They're making a play on words here. All right. As always, we got to see Stan Lee Presents. So what are we going to get here? Peter Cushing. Oh, Madhouse. The Hammer films of Cushing and Lee. Inside Amicus. All right. Letters to the editor. The great Vincent Price with Peter Cushing. They co-starred in Madhouse, but I think we're going to see that later in the magazine. So, Peter Cushing, Thespian Terror Titan. Yeah. So Peter Cushing starred in about 1 million films for Britain's Hammer Studios. He also starred in quite a number of films for Hammer's rival Amicus Studios. And if you still can't place him, he played Grand Moff Tarkin in the original 1977 Star Wars. That may be where you know him from. But you've definitely seen him one way or another. And so in the Hammer Frankenstein films, he was the bad guy. He was Baron Frankenstein. But in the Hammer Dracula films, he was the good guy. He was Professor Van Helsing. And then in the later Dracula films that were set in the 20th century, he was a descendant of the original Professor Van Helsing, Lorimer Van Helsing. But it was basically the same character. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about this one, Night Creatures. Yeah, Peter Cushing really is one of my favorite horror actors. I know there are a lot of great ones, and it's hard to choose, but my top ones always come out to be Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Madhouse, number one, you should be. This was a sort of a 1970s version of the movie Scream. In other words, it was a meta horror movie 20 years before Scream came along. In this movie, Vincent Price plays a horror movie actor named Paul Toombs, who was a hit in the old days and had lots of successful horror films. especially with a particular character, Dr. Death. And then one night there was a murder of his fiancée, and Paul Toombs, the character, honestly doesn't know whether he did or didn't commit the murder. So he's relegated to, you guessed it, a madhouse. And now, as the movie begins, as the main story of the movie begins, he has just been released from the madhouse and he's trying to resume his movie acting career. And a new series of murders begins in the style of his character, Dr. Death. And once again, Paul Toombs honestly does not know whether he is or is not the murderer because he has had blackouts. So we have to guess and see if we can solve the mystery of who is it him? Is he really the murderer and has his character gone to his head? Or is there someone else in the movie industry world that he works in who secretly has an axe to grind against him? Yeah, Madhouse is absolutely worth seeing. If you have somehow missed it until now, because I missed it until I was an adult. I somehow never saw it as a kid. I only caught it as an adult. But since then, I've seen it probably 10 times. So it's absolutely worth catching. So if you've somehow missed it, I'm sure you can probably find it online. Madhouse, starring Vincent Price and Peter Cushing. Okay. Conan the Barbarian. I was never that into Conan, but I know some people loved Conan. Just loved it. Not just the character, but the whole world. Huh. Dr. Frankenstein, I presume. So, from the movie Curse of Frankenstein, which was the first Hammer Studios Frankenstein film. This is Peter Cushing playing Baron Frankenstein. And this is Christopher Lee in his one and only appearance as the Frankenstein monster. In the subsequent Hammer Studios Frankenstein movies, the continuing character was Baron Frankenstein. And in each movie, he would create a new monster, and then that one would be destroyed by the end of the film. And then in the next movie, he would have to create another new monster, and so on. So you got some variety in the monsters. That part of it was good. But Hammer's approach to the Frankenstein story was always that the real villain was not the monster. The villain was Baron Frankenstein himself. And the monsters were scary and dangerous, but really they were among his victims too. And they absolutely portrayed Baron Frankenstein much less sympathetically than Dr. Frankenstein, played by Colin Clive in the Universal films, had been. This is from Evil Frankenstein. This scene always bugged me. If you're familiar with this movie, he goes back to his hometown, which he's been exiled from for 10 years. It's very important that he not be recognized. So he goes there, it's carnival time, luckily, so he has a mask, and he's sitting down, and he is getting away with not being recognized. But then he sees something that upsets him, and he opens his big mouth and starts yelling in a pub full of people. And he, gives himself away. He is a genius, but he's the kind of an idiot that only a genius can be. He lets his arrogance get the better of him. If he kept his mouth shut, they probably would have continued to not recognize him. Yeah. This is a scene that Peter Cushing absolutely did not want to film, where this was in the 5th Hammer Frankenstein film, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, which is a pretty good film, but there's a part in it where Baron Frankenstein mistreats a young lady in a way that absolutely would not have been shown when the film series started 10 years earlier. And Peter Cushing found this loathsome. He absolutely was against this scene. And famously, he apologized to the actress when the cameras were not rolling. He was absolutely against it. Oh, the beast must die. Bloodwaters of Dr. Z. My guess is, if you know this movie, you almost certainly know it from Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they made fun of it. You know, it's kind of funny, though, on Mystery Science Theater. I mean, I like that show, but they make fun of a lot of movies that I actually really like A Mad Monster with George Zucco. All right, so these were the two big guns of Hammer Studios, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Nowadays, probably Christopher Lee is a bit better remembered, but they both were big box office draws in their day, in the 60s and 70s. And they actually both did a Star Wars, so for younger viewers, you do know them as Grand Moff Tarkin from the first Star Wars and Count Dooku from the prequel trilogy. And also Christopher Lee was in the Lord of the Rings movies. But to those anywhere near my age group, they're mostly known for their work in the Hammer Studios horror films. Also, both of them appeared in the Amicus Studios films. That was the Hammer Studios rival company. They both got gigs in Amicus films. Yeah, so there was a series of these Dracula movies set in the past. They were period pieces. And they did maybe 6 of them that were set in the past. Then they had the idea to move the series to the current time. So they made Dracula in 1972, where Dracula entered the then modern world. And he was hunted by a descendant of Professor Van Helsing, Lorimer Van Helsing, again played by Peter Cushing. Dracula in 1972 got a lot of flack. I really didn't think that one was really that bad. There were some parts of that were okay. But the next one after that, the Satanic Rites of Dracula, they had completely jumped the shark. They were off the rails. The whole series had gone off the rails. And, you know, it's not the fault of Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing. They did the best they could, but the story just didn't work. I did like, though, the way that they showed Drac being killed in the olden days at the beginning of Dracula 1972, when he got the wagon wheel to the chest, because it's wood. It's a wooden stake. And that's not a spoiler. That's right at the beginning of the movie. Here they are again. Peter Cushing usually did not really play a monster character. Christopher Lee wound up playing the monster a lot because he was a big guy. This is back to Curse of Frankenstein. So Hammer Studios was a very successful British horror movie company. This rival studio, Amicus, decided they were going to produce a series of monster movies. And they even hired some of the regular Hammer Studios actors, including Hammer's biggest guns, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. And they had a very similar tone and vibe to the Hammer films. So it could almost be confusing when you see a movie as to, is this a Hammer film or an Amicus film? But the easy way to tell is it set in the then present day of the 1970s? If so, it's almost certainly an Amicus movie. If it's set in the past, it's a Hammer film. Hammer loved doing period pieces. And Amicus either was too cheap or couldn't be bothered, but they set all of their stories in the present day. And I know Hammer did a couple that were in the present day, but if you follow this rule of thumb, you'll be right almost all the time. One of my favorite Amicus ones is The Skull, where a haunted skull, which is a relic of the Marquis de Sade, is taking possession of people. And you had Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in that one, too. Oh, The House That Dripped Blood. That's another good Amicus one. Amicus did an awful lot of anthology horror movies. I have a whole video separately that's on The House That Dripped Blood. This has 5 segments in it, 5 short stories with a wraparound story about a police detective who's investigating this house and all the terrible things that have happened in it. My favorite of the stories in that is the one where Christopher Lee has a daughter that he tries to keep secluded from the rest of the world, and we're shown why. Okay. Dracula in 1972 was one thing. Satanic Rites of Dracula was worse. That was pretty bad. Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires was a whole new quantum worse. This was a kung fu vampire movie. Yes, really. Mercifully, Christopher Lee did not humiliate himself by appearing as Dracula in that one. Oh, this was a famous ad in the 1970s. This was in comic books and youth-oriented magazines all over the place. Dim Mak, the Death Touch. And this guy who called himself Count Dante, not surprisingly, he was not a count, and his name wasn't even Dante. And just in case you're easily impressed, no, there is no such thing as Dim Mak, the Death Touch. It was completely made up. Completely made up. But I'm sure they got a lot of kids' money. Just imagine if there were such a thing as a death touch, where you could just touch a human being in a certain way and they would drop dead. Do you really think they would sell it to kids out of the back of a magazine? Does that sound plausible? I mean, even as a kid, you must be like, no, that can't be right. Whoa. Yikes. Oh, Barnabas. So Dark Shadows was a soap opera, like any other soap opera, except that it was all gothic horror. But it was the same format. It was on 5 days a week, and they had continuing storylines. They had a lot of supernatural stories, not exclusively, but a lot of supernatural stories. And even the ones that didn't have supernatural elements were, crime stories, usually spooky crime stories like Edgar Allan Poe stuff. And they had Barnabas Collins became the main character on the show, even though he wasn't on it at the beginning. He was a vampire. And there were characters who were witches, ghosts. They did a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story. They did a Crawling Hand story. You can find all the episodes online. There's a lot of them, though. There's a lot. I think the ones with Barnabas Collins start around episode 100 or so. You can look it up. I don't know the exact number, but it's about 100 episodes in they introduced Barnabas Collins. Impossible? Not for the super bodybuilding system. Wow. Yeah. They would never sell this today. Instead of just selling you a t-shirt with the comic book character on it, they were selling you iron-ons that you at home would iron onto a t-shirt, a blank t-shirt that you already had. That's a lot of work. People nowadays couldn't be bothered with that much work. Oh, Monster Ghost. Did any of you ever send away for the Monster Ghost? I always wanted to as a kid, but I never did. Maybe it's not too late. You can get a Marvel belt buckle. There was a kid in my junior high who had a Kiss belt buckle, you know, the rock band Kiss, and he never went a day without it. I'm pretty sure he wore it every day for 3 years. Retire before 50? Well, let me tell you something. Based on my YouTube demographics, it's way too late for some of us who are watching this video, including me. So that's not going to happen. Listen, if you enjoy classic monsters and vintage horror, you would love my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. I've written a series of novels set in a haunted forest, Mourner's Woods. Each book has a completely new cast of characters enter into this forbidden wilderness and encounter a new threat. I have a swamp monster one, I have a ghost one, I have a death cult one, I have a monster versus monster one, a giant spider one, and I average about one a year. So check back every now and then and you may find there's another new one. They're for sale on Amazon, and I sell them in paperback, in ebook, and they're available in audiobook as well. My books, again, are the Mourner's Woods books, available on Amazon. My name is Paul Edwards. Thanks for spending some time with me looking through Monsters of the Movies magazine, issue number 8. I'll see you in Mourner's Woods.